All right, so now that we have we've had our brief overview of the interface, let's actually start looking at creating a 3D ball bounce here in Maya. And so before we can even do the ball bounce, we are going to set up our own really simplistic rig. So this is going to be sort of a little introduction to rigging. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by creating a sphere for our ball. So go up here to go to create, polygon primitives, and let's just throw a sphere in here. And then I'm going to grab the sphere and I'm going to group it to itself 3 times. So with that geometry selected, I'll hold Control and press G. So Control G, Control G, Control G until I have 3 groups. Now I would recommend having your outliner open. So if it's not, click this icon here in the bottom left-hand side of your toolbar or your tool panel here. And when I click on this, it's going to open up our outliner, and there I should have a group node labeled Group 3. Now I want to expand this, and if you want to expand an entire group, you'll want to hold the Shift key, and while holding Shift, click that little plus symbol directly to the left of that group itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click that plus symbol next to Group 3, and that'll expand the entire group. And inside here we have Group 3, Group 2, Group 1, and then your geometry. So let's go ahead and start naming everything. Again, you always want to name everything in your scene no matter what it is. And so I'm going to start here at the top. Now, I haven't really talked about this yet, but each of these group nodes are going to be a particular attribute for animation. So this first one is going to be for translation, and we're only going to animate translation on this group node. So let's go ahead and call this translate and hit enter. For group 2, let's go ahead and double click on that, and this one will dictate your scale. So I'm going to go ahead and call that scale. And then this third one here that's called group 1, I'm going to click on that, and let's call that rotate. And that's going to dictate our ball rotation or the spin of our ball. And then this last one here is our geometry. So let's go ahead and name this ball geo. So again, just to recap, the first one's translate, second one's scale, the third one's rotate, and then the last one here at the bottom is ball geo. So that's mostly our rig. We just have a few things left to kind of clean up on this. So this first option here is our translation, and this is what will dictate the movement of our ball. So we're going to have an up and down, and then we're going to have a forwards motion for our ball bounce, and that's all going to come from this group node. Now, before I kind of start talking about updating the pivot for this, let me actually create a ground plane real quick so we have a floor for this to bounce on. So I'm going to go to Create, Polygon Primitives, and let's throw in a plane surface. And then I'm going to let's grab that ground plane. Not sure what it's doing there. And scale it out. And then we're going to be pushing our ball forward in X here eventually. So let's stretch this out to give ourselves some room for our ball to roll forward. And that should be it for our ground plane. Oh, actually, I need to scoot it down a little bit. Like so. And then now we can start fixing our ball. So if I grab the translation, so now we're thinking about the pivot point and how this ball moves. I think it would be a little more intuitive if our ball is bouncing from the bottom of our sphere instead of the center. So that's one of the great things about having these 3 group nodes is each group node can have its own individual pivot point. So let's grab the translate group node, and let's come down here so we can actually see the bottom of our ball. Might actually have to add, I'm going to grab our ground plane here, and I'm going to add its own display layer, and then I'm going to temporarily turn that off. And then I'm going to grab that translate group node from the outliner again, and I want to update the pivot point, and we can do that by holding D like delta, V like Victor, and then I'm going to left click and drag from the center of my my move tool. So there I have a kind of a yellow circle. I'm going to left click and drag on that yellow circle and drag straight to the bottom of my sphere right there at that bottom vertice. I'll let go of left click and then both keys, and that's our movement or translation pivot point. So it should move from the bottom of the sphere. Now let's move to the next group node, which is our scale. And I'm going to turn on my ground plane again. So let's see here. Now, if I grab the scale node, so this scale node is going to determine my squash and stretch for my ball. Now, the pivot point is currently in the center, and if I were to squash and stretch this as it is currently, the ball is going to lift up off the ground, and that's going to make it so that I have to counter animate this, which I really don't want. It would be nice if I squash this, if it actually squashed flat to the ground without having to counter animate that. So let me undo that squash there. Let's make sure again we have the scale node selected. I'm going to hide the ground here, and let's move this pivot point to the bottom of the sphere as well. So again, I'm going to hold D and V, and then left click and drag here from the center and drag it straight to that vertex here below. And then if we test this out, so now you can see how we squash flat to the ground because our pivot point is in the correct place. And then so the last one here, the rotation, this is going to determine the spin of your ball. And so we do want this ball to actually spin here on the Z axis from the center of the ball. So that one's actually good to go as well. And then the ball geo, we're actually not going to animate the geo. All of our animation is going to come from the prior 3 group nodes. So I actually don't need to do anything to the pivot point of the ball geometry itself. So now the last thing we want to do is we need to clean up the attributes on our rig so we don't accidentally select keys or set keys on attributes that we don't want animated. So, for example, with our translation, this should only give us translation. We should not be animating rotation, scale, or visibility on this particular group node. Now, this is kind of the job of a rigger. So if you're a rigger, one of your jobs is to make sure one of your animators or the animators don't royally screw up your rig. And believe me, animator will screw up a rig if you give them the opportunity. So what we want to do is we want to hide these attributes so they don't even have the opportunity to accidentally select keys and mess up the rig. So let's start here with the translation. I'm going to grab the translation group node from the outliner. And then over here, again, we've determined that we don't need rotation, scale, or visibility. So what I'll do here is I'm going to left click on the word rotate X, and I'm going to drag all the way down to the word visibility. They'll all be highlighted in blue. Now, if you right click on any of these words, I could right click on the word scale, for example, and go down. You have a few options here. We have lock selected, unlock selected, hide selected, and lock and hide selected. Now, if you just do lock selected, it will lock those attributes. And then it puts this little gray indicator here letting you know that no matter what you do, you cannot adjust or change these particular attributes. If I actually come over here and select my, my translate group node, and if I bring up my move tool, you'll notice that move tool has the normal colors, and I can actually move in my translation attributes. But if I switch over to, let's say, my rotation tool, that tool is grayed out, and no matter what I do, I cannot rotate this object. If I hit R, the same thing for scale is grayed out, and I can't do anything because those attributes are locked. Now, we're not quite finished yet, so I want to hide those so that we don't even know that they're an option. So I'm going to go back and select my translate group node, and then I'm going to select the rotate, scale, and visibility of this node, and I'm going to right click on those, and let's go to hide selected. And so that'll hide those, and we can no longer see those particular attributes. And then we just need to go down the hierarchy. So let's go to scale now and select it. Now scale, this one's kind of a weird one. We need rotation, and we also need scale for this one. So it's kind of weird. Why would we need rotation for our scale? That'll come into play once we actually get to animating our ball. So we'll set this up for now, but I'll show you later why we're going to do this. So let's start here by locking the translations. So I'm going to grab translation X, Y, and Z from the attribute, or the channel box rather. I'm going to right click, and instead of doing these one at a time, let's go down to lock and hide selected, and it'll actually do both at once. It'll lock them and then hide them from view. And then let's see here. We also want to get rid of the visibility on the scale attribute, or the scale channel box. So I'm going to click on the word visibility. I'll right click, and let's go down to lock and hide selected. And so that's our scale. So we should be able to rotate and scale out of this particular node. The rotation. So with this one, we just need to lock the translation, scale, and visibility. So really, we just need rotation out of this. So let's grab all the translates. Let's lock and hide those. And let's grab the scale and visibility and lock and hide those. And so for our scale, or for the rotate, we should only have rotation. And then for the ball geometry, we're not animating this at all. Really, the only thing we might use in this is the visibility. So let's select everything but visibility. And then lock and hide those. And so we should just have visibility on our ball geo. And again, just to recap, if you grab your translation, your channel box should only have translation X, Y, and Z. If you grab your scale, you should only have rotation and scale. If you click on your rotation group node, you should only have rotation in the channel box. And then for your ball geo, we only have visibility, and that's it. Now, real quick, just to show you why scale has rotation as well. Well, this actually allows us to build in anticipation for your ball bounce. So if we want to make your ball lean in and out of the ball bounce, we would use this to do that. So let's actually grab our scale and add rotate, or I'm sorry, we're going to add some stretch here. And then we want to grab the rotation attribute or in the channel box of our scale. So if I wanted to rotate this back, you can see we can rotate that to anticipate maybe the arc of our ball bounce. So that's why we have rotation in the scale channel. Now if I actually go to the rotation group node and start rotating this, this rotation group node is what gives us our ball spin. So our ball needs to roll forward as it's going through our animation. Now the great thing about the way we've set this up is when we rotate this, it maintains the original volume of our ball. It doesn't break the volume or shape of our sphere as we rotate it. That's why we still have rotation in scale, even though scale is scale. So let me zero this back out. And let's come back into scale and set all of our scales back to 1 and the rotation of Z back to 0. And one last thing to finalize our ball geometry here, and that's adding some kind of texture to it. So when we start adding spin to our ball, we're going to need some point of reference or texture on this so we can actually see that animation. If we leave it as a flat gray ball, we're not going to know that it's rotating. So let's deselect this. And I'm going to click directly on the geometry here. I'm going to right click and assign a favorite material, Lambert. I'm going to come over here and name the Lambert. Let's call it ball underscore Lambert. And then in the color channel, I'm going to plug in a ramp. So I'm going to click the input node for the color channel of our Lambert. Let's go in the left column, select 2D textures, and then the right column, select ramp. And then so the ramp here only has two channels. I want 3 colors, so I'm going to click here in the center to add a third one. And then I'm going to click on the bubble here for the first channel. And then let's come down here to selected color and double click on its swatch. And I'm going to click on this red swatch here to turn it red, and then hit done. I'll go to the next one and do the same thing, but this time I'm going to make it green, hit done. I'll click the last one here at the end, double click on its selected color, and then turn it blue and hit done. And then we need to update the interpolation. So right now it's set to linear, and that's what's giving us this gradation between the 3 colors. So actually click on the word linear and switch it to none. And so you have a hard difference between them, or a hard line. And what I can do is update the position of these. And really I want to make them kind of equidistant from each other so that we have this split into thirds. Like so. And then let's go ahead and preview this on our geometry. So I'm going to hit 6 on my keyboard. And let's go back to the material attributes of this and go into that ramp again. And so if we look at this, this isn't really looking like a beach ball or a ramp's going in the wrong direction. I'd like it to start here from the top and go to the bottom. So to do that, we're just going to switch the type here from V ramp to U ramp. And now it's going to start here from the top and go to the bottom. And so we have this divided evenly into thirds. And I'd like this to maybe repeat a few times so again it looks more like a beach ball. So while we're in the ramp here, at the top of the attribute editor you have 2 tabs. We have ramp and then the place 2D texture node or tab. If I click on that, we'll get the placement node, and here where it says repeat UV, in the first value or the U value, I'm going to come in here and key in a value of 4. And it'll repeat that ramp a few times, and now we have something that kind of looks like a beach ball. Now, you don't have to make yours look exactly like mine if you want to use different colors or if you want to repeat it more or less than I've done it here, but just something to break up the surface, and so then when it begins to rotate, we can actually tell what it's doing. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hit 5 on my keyboard. So when we're working, we're going to leave it at flat gray. I'm not really going to look at that color until we even start adding spin on our ball. So we'll leave it as is, and I'm going to hit Control S, or actually let's do a file save scene as, and then let's save this file here. So it's going to be, again, crawl underscore Zachary underscore BallBounce. So again, you do want to create a project folder for this. So if you haven't created your project folder, please do so. And then we're ready to start our animation. Now, again, before you do any animation, and I know I already did this in the interface video, but you still want to double check because we started a new project. Let's go up to Windows, Settings and Preferences. Let's go to Settings here on the left and just make sure our time is set to 24 FPS. Our animation, make sure we have weighted tangents turned on. And then down here at the bottom, we're going to select Time Slider, and let's make sure our frame rate is set to 24 frames per second. Let's close this. Right click on our time slider here, and let's go to time, where are you? Playback speed, and we're going to make sure this is play every frame max real time. All right. So let's actually start our animation. So we're going to start this one sort of component at a time. So I'm going to build in the up and down first, and then we'll do the forward movement, and then we'll start looking at the other elements like squash and stretch and things like that. So we're going to build in the up and downs first. And I'm going to start here from the front view. So I'm going to switch to my front camera. Now, you don't want to just click on your geometry and try to start animating. And this is one of the reasons why we cleaned up our rig and we locked out some of these attributes. So we don't have the temptation to come in here and set keys on the geometry. So as you're animating this, I would recommend keeping your outliner open so you can quickly and easily just click on these group nodes as you need them. So I want to click on the Translate group node. Now, if you don't want to use the outliner for this, you can pick walk these using the directional arrows on the bottom right-hand corner of your keyboard. So if I, let's say I do click on the ball geometry here from the work view, it's going to select the ball geometry, which is at the bottom of the hierarchy in the outliner. But if I hit the up arrow, it'll go up one hierarchy level at a time. So it'll go to the rotate. If I hit up again, it'll go to scale. If I hit up again, it'll go to translate. If I hit down, it'll go in the opposite direction. So it'll go down in the hierarchy. So we can quickly toggle between these, again, if you don't want to take the effort to go over there and click in the outliner. So I'm going to click on the translate over here, and we're going to start setting keys. So we're going to start on frame 1. I'm going to give myself, I don't want 200 frames for this animation. That's probably too long. Let's make our end playback here, our total duration, only 100 frames. And that should be good. So we'll have frames 1 to 100. And then I'm going to put my current time indicator here at frame 1. And our starting position is actually going to be up in the air. So I'm going to grab my ball and just yank it up here somewhere. And I'm going to key select just the y-axis. So we're only going to animate in one axis at a time. So with this translate group node selected, I'm going to come over here to the channel box for that, and I'm going to right click on translate Y and hit key selected. Now again, because I keyed that one attribute, you can see there's a key here, so it's highlighted in red. And if we come down here on frame 1, there's also a red indicator there on the timeline. So this is where we start building in the timing for our animation. And you know, as beginning animators, you may not know exactly where your next keyframe should be. So we're going to kind of guess at this until we get something that looks correct. So again, if you've done this for a while, you might have a pretty good idea of the timing of this. But before you have a lot of practice with it, again, it's going to be trial and error. So I'm going to go forward maybe 13 frames. So we'll go to frame 13. And so this next frame is going to be our contact. This is when the ball hits the ground. So what I could do is come up here to translate Y and key in a 0 for that attribute. It's going to bring our ball back down to 0, or the ground plane. And then I'm going to right click on translate Y and hit key selected. And then we'll go forward. I'm going to say about 22 or 220, frame 22. And then I'm going to pull my ball up here in the Y axis. And then I'm going to key select my Y attribute there on frame 22. And then we'll go forward to, say, frame 32 now instead of 22. And then this is going to be our next contact. Let's 0 that out and key select it. And then our next apex or height of our jump will be frame 40. Now you'll notice as I do this, each time my the height of my jump isn't quite as tall anymore. So, gradually the ball is going to lose momentum as this progresses, and we're not going to maintain the same height throughout. So I am intentionally making these less higher as I go. And so here on Translate Y on frame 40, let's go ahead and key select that. And let's go to frame, I don't know, 48, and we'll make our next contact. And key select that. All right, so I'm going to preview this. So let's lower our playback range. So on this first value here on the right-hand side, it's set to 100. Let's go ahead and set this to frame, I don't know, 55. So even though my whole animation is technically 100 frames, my playback range is only 55 because I don't want to preview those last 50 frames because nothing's happening. And let's go ahead and hit play now and see what happens. All right. So again, this is pretty close to real time, but it would probably be better if we just did a play blast to get 100% accurate with this. So let's look at actually setting up a play blast for this. So I'm going to stop the animation, and then to get the play blast settings brought up, I'm going to right click on the timeline, and then let's go to play blast and click on the options box. I'm going to go up to edit and reset my settings because they might be carried over from the previous class. And before I do this, let's frame up our camera so we can see the whole ball bounce. Yep, so that looks good. So let's that should be good. Okay. And then so back to the settings here. So by default, we're going to leave most of these settings alone here at the top. So where it says view and show ornaments, we'll leave those on. We'll skip these two dialog boxes here and we'll go straight to the format. Now I'm going to recommend we switch it from AVI to QT or QuickTime. Where it says encoding, let's switch that from PNG. Let's actually scroll up here to H.264. The render quality here is going to determine the quality setting of your render. Now this is strictly for preview, so I don't really care if this is 100% quality, so I'm actually going to leave it at 70%. Display size, what this does is it just takes the display size of your workspace here or your work view for this, so we're going to leave that alone. And then for scale, so if we leave it at 0.5, what it does is it actually halves your current render view. So if I were to render it now, it would render half of what it sees here, or it would render it 50% smaller, I should say. But I'm going to go ahead and take this all the way up to 1. So I'm going to take the slider here and jack it all the way to the right. Frame padding we don't need, so we'll leave it alone at 4. We'll leave remove temporary file. Now if I leave it the way it is now, what happens is Maya creates a temporary file and it opens up the video and you can preview it. As soon as you close that out, it deletes the temporary file and we can no longer get it back unless we do another play blast. What I would recommend is that we actually select this option that says Save to File and then hit Browse. And it's okay if you put it to your desktop just because this is a temporary file that we're just going to use strictly to get the idea of our timing. So I'm going to go ahead and name it BallBounce PB for Play Blast, hit Save. And then to actually do the play blast, I'm going to hit play blast here in the bottom left-hand corner. And then we have to wait for it to go through the timeline. It will actually go through the whole timeline that you have brought up or your playback range. And then as soon as it's done, it's going to bring up VLC Media Player with your video. Now VLC will only play through once. So we do have to come down here to the bottom of VLC Media Player. And then there's this icon that looks like 2 arrows looping around into a circle. If you click that, it'll turn blue, and then if we hit play, it'll actually cycle through your whole animation. All right, so now this is a more accurate representation of the performance we're getting out of this ball, and this is going to help us kind of determine, what we need to fix. Now, you guys again should have, or you guys have done a 2D ball bounce, right? So you at least know the principles of animation and how to create an effective ball bounce. By looking at this, can you tell me? I mean, anybody blurt it out, but tell me, what's wrong with this? What can we do to fix our animation? Squash and stretch. Yep, we definitely need that. What else is wrong? So I talked about linear and flat tangent handles and what that does to the performance of your animation. Any suggestion as to what we might do with that to fix the performance here? So if you're thinking about the apexes of your ball bounce and the contacts on the ground and the rate of movement. No? Okay. Slow in, slow out for the apex, right? So we need your ball to linger in the air. So we're going to add slow and slow out to correct the timing there. And then the ball bounce, once it hits the ground, so it's kind of floaty, right? So each time it hits that contact, it actually still has slow in and slow out, which wouldn't be, what we're going for with that. When your ball's hitting the ground, it needs to be pretty quick and snappy. So we're going to need to fix that. And then the timing is probably a little bit off. The spacing between my frames for this is probably too wide apart, and again, the timing just feels just a bit off. So let's go ahead and close this out. And let's grab our ball here, and then let's open up the graph editor to fix this. So let's go to Windows, Animation Editors, and Graph Editor. Oh, so I made a mistake there, and I selected the geometry and not the group node. So make sure you grab the right node here. So I'm going to grab the Translate Group node. And now we get that curve. And you can tell just by looking at this curve where those apexes of our jumps are, and you can see where those contacts are. So again, all these highest points here at the top, these are our apexes, and then these keys here at the bottom are our those are our contacts. So I'm going to start by shifting everything down a little bit. Actually, let's start by making these flat and linear where we need them to be. So I'm going to marquee select and just grab all of these tangent handles here at the top of the apexes. So we really have 3 of those, and with those selected, I'm going to come here and select the flat tangent handle just to make sure they're flat, and it looks like they already were. And let's grab the 3 keys here at the bottom. So those are your contacts, and we need to make those linear. So this is what's going to make that fast, snappy animation, because it's not going to hold on these keyframes as long. And to get the linear, again, it's this kind of diagonal line up here. If I click on that, you can see it changes my tangent handles to point directly at the previous keyframe before and after, creating that much faster animation. And so we can actually change or update the timing of our animation or the performance simply by shifting the keys in the graph editor here. So my first keyframe I actually want to leave alone, so I'm not going to adjust this one at all, but I am going to select all the keyframes that happen after that. And so with all these selected, what I want to do is I want to shift them down, and I'm going to hold the shift key, and I'm going to middle mouse click and drag to the left, and then shift these down, and I want this second keyframe to be on frame 10. And then I'm going to deselect all these, and my next selection is going to leave out the first 2 keys. I'm going to select everything else, and then I want this next one to be on, let's say, frame 16. So let's hold shift and left click and middle mouse drag these to the left, and then we'll deselect those, and this time I'll just grab the last 3 frames, and I want these to be on, see, I want that next keyframe here to be on frame 22, so let's shift those down, so that's on frame 22. And then the next one will be on 27, so let's grab these last 2 frames and push them down. And then that last frame, let's say, put it on frame 32. So I'm just going to grab that final frame there and push it down. And so as this goes on, each one of these apexes should decrease, so it's not as tall in the y-axis, but also the arc that they're making won't be as wide. So that's kind of what we built in there. Now, if you wanted, you could update the height of each of these. So let's say we were to take our current time indicator and put it right over that key there on frame 16. Now, if you wanted to update this arc, you could take that key and in the graph editor, push it up or down, and that will update its number of Maya units, how far up it's traveling up or down within that y-axis. So again, we could kind of use the graph here as a visual indicator using these arcs, and these should just gradually kind of do this kind of stair-stepping effect where the next arc here, or that apex, is it's lower than the previous. Now, I would also like to add maybe a little bit more ball bounce to this. It would be nice if we kind of had a jitter here. So we might need probably 3 more keyframes to get that in. And so I'm going to go ahead and add those. So let's come in here and let's add the next one at, let's say frame 35. Oh, didn't want to do that. Where'd that go? No idea. Oh, did I? Oh, I see what I did. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to key select my translate Y here in the channel box, right there in frame 35. And you can see there in the graph editor, it actually puts a key down here at frame or at value of 0. So I can just grab that and the middle mouse click and drag it up like so. So that'll be our next apex. And then the contact will be on, let's say frame 38. So let's come in here into the translate Y, key in a 0, and then key select that. Let's go forward to frame 40, and let's add another key here. So I'm going to key select my translate Y. Let's grab that key here in the graph editor and push that up. We'll go forward a couple frames to frame 42. We'll do our next contact. So key in a 0 there for translate Y, key select, and then we'll do one more. Let's say, we'll do this. This might be iffy, but we'll do this on ones. So I'll key select there on frame 43. We'll pull that key up in the graph editor like so. And we'll go to frame 44 and key in a 0 to bring it back down. And then key select that there on frame 44. And now we have a lot more ball bounces. Now I do want to clean up these tangents again, so I'm going to grab all the tangents or the keys here at the bottom where the ball contacts. And let's go ahead and make those linear. I'm going to grab all the tangents or the keys here at the top of each apex, and let's flatten those out. And then let's frame this up again, and let's maybe make the apexes a little shorter here at the bottom. So we want this to be, gradually taper off, and this last one needs to be really low. If this is too drastic, it's going to look like an awkward pop just because it's animated on a single frame. And so we should have something that just gradually tapers off like this. And let's hit play and see what that looks like. I think it's getting a lot closer. We might need to fix those last few apexes a little bit in height, but I think for the most part we're getting there. Now something else we could do is, again, so we're constantly thinking about the 12 principles of animation when we're doing this. So we have slow in, slow out built in. We're going to need to exaggerate this a little bit. So exaggeration is another one of those 12 principles that we're thinking of. And what we want to exaggerate are these types of motions. So when it's up in the apex or in the air, we maybe exaggerate that a little bit so it lingers or hangs a little bit longer. So we're going to exaggerate that slow and slow out. And we'll also exaggerate the linear keys for the impact just a little bit, so it's going to hit the ground a little harder. So let's stop this playback and let's open up the graph editor again to actually make sure we actually have the translate group node selected. And let me, so this one probably needs to come up a little bit higher. This one a little bit higher. And that one just a little bit higher. And then, so let's look at exaggerating these. So I'm actually going to marquee drag and select all my keys. I'm going to right click, and I need to break these tangent weights so that I could start adding slow and slow out on these and control these handles independently from one another. I also want to make sure my tangent weight is weighted, so I'm going to come down here and hit weighted tangents, and let's come down and hit free tangent length. And let's come in on an individual basis. So I'm going to select that key, and then marquee drag and select that handle, and then drag it to the right. Let's come down here and grab this linear one. Actually, let's do the linear ones for last. So I'm going to come up here and move on to the next apex. And I'm going to drag this handle here slightly to the left. Let's grab the next handle and drag it slightly to the right. Move to the next key, select it, and then grab this handle, move it to the left. Grab the right handle, move it to the right. And you can see we're adding more of a hold here because we're exaggerating this, this curve. And now let's go to the linear handles, and I'm going to pull these up just a little bit so that we could straighten out this curve as it gets closer to that contact key there. So I'm going to grab this handle here on the left side, and I'm going to push it up and to the right a little bit, and I'm really just kind of pointing it at the previous keyframe a little more. So that straightens that out a little bit, and then we're just going to keep going through here, pushing these in a little bit to straighten out that curve. And so that's going to add more exaggeration to both our the heights or the apex of our jump or our bounce, and then it's going to also do the same thing for the contacts. So now if I hit play, we should have something that feels kind of bouncy. All right, so let's see, what else do we have? Let's do the forward movement on our ball, and we can actually do it from this camera. So I'm going to do this in the front axis. So let's go ahead and hit stop. Let's go to frame 1, and I'm actually going to do this in the graph editor. Actually, so let's do it in the perspective, or in the front view rather. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit here in the front view, and I know this is going to move forward in, it looks like X, so I want it to go to the right here. So on the first keyframe, I'm going to right click on Translate X and key select that at a value of 0. And then let's go forward here. I'm going to give myself the full 100 frames back to my playback range. And thinking about how this ball is going to bounce and roll. So it's going to continue rolling after it's done bouncing. So I don't want this to stop rolling forward at frame 44. I want it to continue on past the bouncing stage. So, and it's going to go maybe for quite a ways. So I'm going to come forward here maybe around frame 80. And then let's take our ball and drag it forward here in X, like so. And this is another one of those things where we really don't know. It's trial and error until we just see it in playback. So I'm going to kind of guess where I think it should stop. I'm going to come up here where it says Translate X, and let's key select that value on frame 80. And then let's hit play and see what it looks like. So I feel like it could push maybe a little bit further on this. So let's stop this. We can even switch to our perspective view to preview this at this point. It's actually not terrible, but I think we could fix it a little bit more. So let's grab that translate, and let's fix this in the graph editor now. There's actually two things we need to fix. One, we need to fix the curve. So I'm actually going to isolate the translate X value. So I'm going to click on the translate X here from the left column. And right now we have slow in and slow out happening on the curve. Now when we're thinking about this ball animation, we probably wouldn't want the slow in here on the beginning. We would want to slow out at the end, but we would want it to be pretty linear. We want it to start out quick and then lose momentum towards the end of the movement. So let's actually grab this key here at the beginning. Let's grab its handle and let's push it up and have it point towards the last key here at the end on frame 80. So I'll make that more linear. Let's grab the key here at the end and grab its handle and maybe push it to the left a little bit. And this is going to hold that position and add more slow out here. And let's hit play and see what we get. Might actually be too much. Well, let's update the position of how far forward this is going in X. Now you can do this in the graph editor here. So again, if you recall, these the value here on the left going from 0 all the way up positively here is Maya units, and this is Maya units in this particular attribute in X. So if I actually drag this up, let's go to frame 80 here, and grab this key and push it up, you can see it's going to push it forward in X even further. And update that position. Let's hit play and see what that looks like. Let's hold up just a smidge more. Actually, I think it needs to come down a bit. And I think that'll be good. Go back to the graph editor and just checking one last thing here. I just noticed a little bit of a pop here, so I'm just making sure we get. All right, so that looks good. Let's see. So we've got the forward movement, and we adjusted that in the graph editor. So now let's start building in our squash and stretch. So we're, at this point, we're ready to move on to the next group node, or the next attribute. So I'm going to click on the scale group node here. And with this, we want to build in our squashes first, and this is all going to happen in scale. So this should actually squash anytime the ball impacts the ground. So anytime we hit that contact, we really feel that sense of weight hitting the ground. So let's go forward. I'm just going to scrub through until I see that ball hit the ground. So right there on, it looks like frame 10 is our first contact. So let's come to frame 10 and squash the scale of our ball. So we're going to squash this by bringing down the Y value here. And so it's looking like a squash, but one thing we need to think about is our scales. So usually your scales by default are all a value of 1. So you X, Y, Z are 1, 1, 1. Now all of those, when added up, equal 3. So what we need to do is whatever we put in here to squash our ball, it needs to add up to 3. So when we add all three of these attributes, or these three values together, no matter what, should always be 3. So I'm going to come in here, and for my scale of my squash, I'm going to key in a 0.75, a 0.25, I'm sorry, a 0.15, and then, oh, just kidding. It's a 1.25, a 0.5, and then a 1.25. So that's your squash, 1.25, 0.5, and 1.25. And if you add all those up, they should total a value of 3. Now the reason why is because this will maintain the original volume. We're not breaking the original shape or getting off model with our ball bounce. Now we do need to key this, so on frame 10, let's go ahead and select our scales, X, Y, and Z, and with all those selected, I'm going to right click and hit key selected. And then we want to do this for every single contact. So I'm going to scrub through my timeline here at the bottom and look for the next one, so right there on frame 22. And I'll come up here with those values still selected and hit key selected. And I'm just going to keep coming through until we get all of our contacts. So let's just quickly go through these. So frame 32, frame 38, frame 42, frame 44, and then that should be it. All right. So that's our squash. Now, it's going to be kind of hard to determine if our squash is working correctly, if it maintains the shape the whole time. So what I want to do now is I want to come to the frame before and the frame after each squash or each contact. So my first contact is on frame 10. That means I need to go back one frame on frame 9. And let's actually set all these values to 1. So the scale X, Y, and Z should all go back to 1. And let's go ahead and key select those. I'm going to move to frame 11, change all those to 1, and let's key select those. Oh, Make sure they're all selected and key select them. And so you can see that when I start scrubbing through this, the ball will maintain its original shape, squash on impact, and then go back to original shape. So we need to go to the next contact and do the same thing. So here on frame 22 is our next contact. So let's go to frame 21. Let's grab these and key in a 1, and then key select those. Now a quicker way to do this, so you'll notice when you left click and drag on your timeline down here, it constantly does your in-betweens and updates your current animation. If you actually come to, let's say, one of these frames, let's say on frame 9, where our ball is currently the scale I want, which is 1 in X, Y, and Z. If you, instead of left clicking and dragging, if you middle mouse click and drag, you notice your frame updates. So if I go to, let's say, our contact's on frame 22, so that means I need to go to frame 23 after the contact. You'll notice when I move that, the ball stays in the same position. It doesn't actually update the animation. And so what I could do now is with scale X, Y, and Z still selected, I can right click and hit key selected, and it's going to key only that animation on the scales. So when I scrub through this now, when I go to frame 23, it's still in the position I need it, but it goes to the scale I also need. So let's keep doing it this way because it'll be a little faster than having to key it in every single time. So here on frame 23, it has those scales that I want, a value of 1, 1, 1, and 1. Yeah. I'll middle mouse click from frame 23 to the frame right before my next contact, which is the contact's on 32, so I need to be on frame 31. Let's right click and hit key select. Let's middle mouse click and drag to frame 33, so right after that contact, hit key select. Our next contact is 38, so let's go back one frame to 37. Right click and key select. I'll middle mouse click and drag to 39, which is the frame after our contact, and hit key select. And then let's go to frame 41, do the same thing. And then frame 43, do the same thing. And then frame 45. And then when we play this back, we should have a performance where our ball only squashes on the contacts. And so again, thinking about how this ball bounce will work, again, we don't want it to maintain the same amount of impact every time it hits. So the initial impact will be pretty extreme, but they should gradually kind of taper off from there. And again, this is where we're going to use the graph editor to help us with that. So I'm going to grab the scale group node here from the outliner. I'm going to open up the graph editor. And this is what the scale will look like. Now, I'm going to leave the first set of keys alone, so this set over here, we're going to leave those exactly as they are. Now the next set, let's come over here and mark key drag over all the keys here at the top. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse click and drag these down, like so. I'm going to grab all the green ones here at the bottom and do the same thing, but I'm going to drag them up. And then instead of, now that I have all these reduced, I'm going to ignore this set here, and I'm going to move on to the last 4. So I'm going to grab these and push them down. Let's grab the green ones and push them up. Let's move to the next set here, so just these 3, push those down. And the next set of green ones here at the bottom and push those up. And then just the 2 here at the bottom, or the far right here, or the top for the red. Let's grab the green ones and push those up. And then we'll grab this final one here and push it down pretty low. So at this point, you know, we can kind of see this gradual tapering off of that squash. And then if I hit play, we can preview that. All right. And now let's start building in our stretch. So we're going to kind of have to do what we just did with keying in the ones before and after. So if I come in here to frame 9, for example, this is where we're going to build in that stretch. And again, the stretch is pretty similar to what we did with the squash. All 3 values in scale need to add up to the same, but we need to stretch it in the opposite direction. So for X, let's do 0.75. For Y, let's do 1.5, and then for Z, 0.75. I feel like that gives us a pretty nice stretched position. So there on frame 9, let's go ahead and select scale X, Y, and Z, right click and hit key selected. And now we just need to update every frame before and after our contacts. So I'm going to mouse click and drag to frame 11, right click and hit key select, middle mouse click and go to frame 21, key select. Let's go to middle mouse click to drag to 23, key select. So each time I'm doing this, I'm always middle mouse clicking and dragging so my animation doesn't update and it maintains that scale. And we'll go to 31, key select, go to 33, key select, we'll go to 37, key select, let's go to 39, key select, let's see, so that should be 41, we'll key select that. So we'll skip 42 and go to 43, key select that, and let's see. I'm not going to do the last two here because we're going to reduce this so much that it's going to be barely noticeable, and at that point we wouldn't really have any squash or stretch anyhow, so we'll go ahead and leave that alone. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to start maintaining the shape of our ball when it hits, when it goes through every apex. So at this apex, my ball should not be stretching, so it should be in the default scale of 1. So I'm going to go to frame 1, and here in the scale X, Y, and Z, let's go ahead and key in a value of 1 to get that back to the original shape, and then let's key select those. And let's find the next apex, so we're just going to scrub through here and kind of see what the ball is doing. So it looks like that's about frame 16. Let's go ahead and select these attributes, key in a value of 1, key select that. The next apex is here on 27, so let's key in a value of 1 for all these, and key select those. The next apex is 35, so let's key in a value of 1 for all these scales, and then key select those. Our next apex is 40. So same thing here. All right. Now if we play this back, it's going to look kind of crazy. Really rubbery and bouncy. So we need to build in more of that kind of tapering off. We're going to use the graph editor again to kind of lessen that and gradually decrease the amount of squash and stretch that's happening. So let's go ahead and frame this up. So I'm going to hit this button up here to frame this a little better. And then I'm going to hold Alt and Shift and maybe stretch it out a little bit this way. And then zoom out. Now, this first set is this shape right here. So all these keys at the beginning, that's the extreme that we want. So I'm going to leave these alone for now. And let's actually move down here and grab the other sets and start adjusting these. So I'm going to start by grabbing all these keys here at the top of my green curve. And let's push those down quite a ways. The next set we're going to grab, I'm actually going to ignore these green ones here, and we're just going to grab the last few here at the end, push those down, and then we'll just keep going through here, deselecting the previous set and gradually decreasing these over time. Now we'll do the reds. So I'm going to grab all these reds here at the bottom. Let's push those up. We'll deselect those and then grab the next set of reds, leaving out the previous. Push those up. And go to the next set. Push those up. On these last two here. And so again, you can see this gradual tapering here of the squash and stretch. So let's minimize that and hit play and see what we have. That feels a little better. Now, we also want to build in anticipation. Let me go ahead and save this before Maya decides to crash on us. We would want this ball to kind of lean back and forth as it's going in and out of the bounces. So let's grab the scale. So this is where we're actually going to get this type of rotation. We're not going to get it out of the rotate, but we're going to get this out of the scale. So I'm going to select scale, and we want to rotate it here on frame 9. Now before we rotate this, let's actually build in the ghosting, or we're going to use something called ghost selected, so that we can have it help us determine what direction we need to rotate this in. So I'll grab this geometry here. Let's go up to the submenu modeling and switch it to animation. We're going to go to visualize, and let's go down to ghost selected and click on the options box. Now I'm going to hit reset just so this goes back to what the settings usually are. What we want to do is switch the type of ghosting to custom frame steps. And then down here you have steps before current frame and steps after. We want this steps before current frame set to 10, and it'll ghost 10 frames prior to your selected key. And then we'll leave the second one here, the steps after current, we'll leave that at 3. And let's go ahead and hit ghost. Now what that does here, you can actually see a ghosting of your geometry, and then as you left click and drag through your timeline, you can actually see the performance of your animation as it goes through. And so this is going to allow me to anticipate the jump and also know where to tilt this back into the arc. So let's come here to the frame right before our contact, and let's grab our scale and let's rotate it back in Z like so. So this should be pointing back in the arc of our ball. Let's come up here into the attribute editor, or the channel box for our scale. I'm going to right click on the Z rotation and hit key selected. Now I'm actually going to go back here to frame 1, and I'm going to zero out rotate 0, or rotate Z, and key select that, so we should have no rotation at frame 1, and then it'll gradually rotate into that position once it gets to frame 9. Now on frame 10, on that squash or the impact, we should have no rotation, so I'm going to come in here, zero out my rotate Z, right click and click key selected. Let's go to frame 11, so that's the frame right after the contact, and we want this to tilt inwards into the arc. So I'm going to rotate this forward a little bit in Z. We'll key select that. Oh, make sure we select the right thing there. And then in the apex here, so on frame 16, I want no rotation. So let's grab that rotate Z, key in a 0, and key select that. Let's go to the frame again right before the contact, tilt this back, key select. Let's go to the actual contact and zero out the Z, key select that. We'll go to frame 23, tilt it forward, key select, and so we're just going to work our way through this entire ball bounce this way, and then once I get done I'll stop. So I'm going to go ahead and at the apex there, key in a 0, key select. Let's go to the frame before the contact, tilt it back, key select, go to the contact, zero it out, key select. Let's see, frame 33, we'll tilt it forward, key select. Let's go to the apex there on frame 35, zero it out, key select, and then on frame 37 we're going to push that back, or tilt it back rather, key select, and then we have a contact on 38, key select that. Now for the rest of these I'm really not going to add it because it's such a small increment of movement that it's not going to make much of a difference. So I'm going to preview this. So it's looking a lot better. So we've got our anticipation in there, we have our exaggeration, we're working on timing, we've got our squash and stretch. So let's stop this here. I'm going to do a file save, and then we'll pick back up on Friday. We're actually almost done. So most of Friday might be a work day. So again, just recap. UVs due for Friday, and then I might actually let you guys take the end of class on Friday. So we need to finish things up at the end of class because it looks like I'm going to get finished with this ball bounce in maybe the first like 20 to 30 minutes. But again, UVs are going to be due on Friday regardless. I think you'll have the weekend to do your ball bounce. So.